Good afternoon. The purpose of the simulation was to gain experience and greater understanding for conflict resolution and negotiations. Specifically, the simulation focused on discussion between various mid-level members of the government, military, and civil society with the objective of gaining greater understanding of the challenges faced when attempting to build shared understanding in the interest of conflict resolution and transformation. The case used for this simulation was set in the early 2000s, shortly after the Chechen Wars. Students played the roles of various members of government, military, and civil society from both Russian and Chechen perspectives. The Chechen case is important for a number of reasons. First, Chechnya has been a site of prolonged conflict causing significant destruction and human suffering. Second, it is a unique case in that Russia has maintained control of Chechnya while letting go of the majority of states that formed the Soviet Union. Third, the objectives of both sides in the conflict are mutually exclusive in that Russia sees Chechnya as within its territory, while the Chechen perspective is that Chechnya should rightfully be independent. Additionally, the damage and loss of life on both sides in the wake of the Chechen Wars has entrenched each camp, leaving the potential for shared understanding elusive. These factors result in a case that is complex, thus necessitating deliberate analysis, which illuminates the challenges to conflict resolution as practiced in the real world. The simulation was conducted in two phases. First, students in character presented an introduction to their respective positions and objectives in the conflict. Second, students discussed both in and out of character the various challenges to resolving the conflict in Chechnya by proposing and defending nonviolent resolution strategies. What I knew going in. Prior to the simulation, I understood that Chechnya had suffered protracted conflict. It is culturally different than the majority of Russia in that it is majority Muslim rather than Orthodox Christian. Additionally, Chechnya has been a source of Salafi fighters for Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and other transnational Salafi extremist groups. My understanding of the Chechen context was further strengthened through the course readings. Although this conflict has broadly been between the government of the Russian Federation and Chechen nationalists, these two sides are not completely unified. The separatist movement in Chechnya has been characterized by infighting. Some groups more strongly align with the global jihad movement, while others have more limited objectives for regional independence. Some groups have been more willing to work with Russian interests, while others maintain a strong degree of animosity. In the case of Russia, there is recognition on the part of some elements of civil society that the situation in Chechnya is inhumane and detrimental to both sides due to the suffering it causes Chechens and the casualties suffered by Russia's military, which has a high rate of conscription. Additionally, Russia's interests in Chechnya became clearer when considering the fossil fuel reserves in the region. This provides more justification as to why Russia has maintained control of Chechnya while letting go of the majority of the former Soviet republics. Additionally, there has been considerable popular support for continued military intervention in the wake of Chechen terrorist attacks within Russia. Better understanding of these variables provided context for the complexity of this case and the potential difficulties that will be faced in negotiating a nonviolent resolution. Chechnya appeared to be a case in which neither side was near exhaustion in spite of the calls from some elements of civil society to find a durable solution. The situation appeared intractable to all attempts at finding a way through it. On the one hand, the Russian Federation could not be expected to end its intervention because it was nowhere near the limits of its military power, and its authoritarian structure made it less responsive to the factions calling for nonviolent resolutions. On the other, continued conflict has strengthened the cohesion and resolve of the Chechen separatist factions. It is often the case that adversity may strengthen the cohesion and resolve of parties to violent conflict rather than breaking them. This understanding indicates that the objective of the negotiation simulation would have to be on building mutual understanding that would set the conditions for conflict transformation. The focus on mid-level individuals from a cross-section of society also supported this assumption. Conflict transformation would require security to meet and discuss freely between potentially hostile elements in order to build understanding and alternative solutions from throughout both camps in order to change the narrative of the overall conflict and thus break the stalemate. Critical factors. The most critical factor for the effectiveness of this type of negotiation that was simulated is the security for otherwise enemy sides to meet and openly discuss their unique positions. This was facilitated in the simulation by situating the discussion outside of Russia. Another critical factor is the freedom for each party to clearly state their position, and from their own perspective. This was facilitated by setting aside the first phase for introductions, followed by open discussion regarding each party's position. I assumed the role of a Chechen separatist leader in order to inject a higher degree of confrontation into the discussion. This was intended to clarify the difficulties of resolving this conflict from the perspective of parties that have as their objective an outcome that is nearly unattainable, namely the independence of Chechnya from Russia. I found that this is a difficult concept to grasp for some elements of the opposing side that wish to refocus on both the culpability of some Chechen factions in atrocities such as terrorist attacks on Russian civilians, as well as the potential for nonviolent resolution that did not include Chechen autonomy. Nonetheless, the initial introduction and discussion provided valuable context for the complexity of the conflict and a better understanding that there are multiple interests held by the various factions on both sides. This complexity makes a simple resolution more difficult, but also presents several avenues through which different factions may find common interests in addition to common understanding. In so doing, changing the narrative that dictates the conflict becomes possible. In the second phase of the simulation, students presented nonviolent resolution strategies, both in and out of character. I presented the solution that actually occurred, allowing de facto autonomy of Chechnya by ceding control to a political strongman that is dependent on the Russian Federation for funding would satisfy much of the separatist objective of independence from Russia. At the same time, a popular leader with Russian backing could rein in or destroy lingering unsatisfied separatist factions. This strategy would necessitate risking a trade-off between further human rights abuses and negative peace, but it would curb outright conflict. As we see today, this is in fact what happened in Chechnya with Ramzan in power. Lessons learned. A key lesson is that even the most complex conflicts may be analyzed and understood by close study of the perspectives and motivations of the parties to it. What may appear to be an intractable stalemate may only appear to be so because the motivations of the various actors are not clearly understood. At the same time, though, many conflicts feature parties with mutually exclusive objectives. Barring exhaustion, a settlement in such cases is not likely. Understanding that it is not likely can inform efforts to engage with actors who are better positioned and more willing and more disposed to work towards a resolution. Additionally, what solution is actually implemented, whether planned or not, will often be less than ideal, in that it will entail risks and trade-offs, as is evident in the current situation in Chechnya. On the one hand, outright war is over. On the other, the peace that exists is negative and personality dependent. How to improve? Future simulations should build upon the mutual understanding of each party's perspective and objectives by focusing the simulation or real-world negotiation members to identify, or by forcing the simulation or real-world negotiation members to identify and list points on which they agree. This can be done through qualitative analysis of each member's testimony to identify key themes and concepts. These can then be compared between the various members. When shared themes appear, members should be encouraged to refine these into potential points of cooperation. This process will move each position from the abstract and place it into practical real-world terms. While it may not immediately lead to conflict resolution, identifying potential points of agreement and follow-on cooperation forces the cognitive processes necessary to begin altering the controlling narrative for the conflict, and thus facilitates conflict transformation.